You know when you hear about some new tech and you're like, whoa, is this a Black Mirror episode? Well, today we're diving into something that could be straight out of that, especially for anyone who's ever, frantically tried to find a student who's wandered off.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Orah, and it's got people in the independent school world buzzing about student safety and well-being, but in a way we haven't really seen before.
It's interesting, right? Because it's not just about knowing where every student is every second. Aura's really trying to change how we think about duty of care in schools, going way beyond just basic security to actually understanding and supporting what students need more holistically.
Okay, so let's break that down because we've got a lot to unpack here. Their website, articles, case studies, the whole shebang. And honestly, some of it sounded a little too good to be true at first.
I hear you.
But then I saw they work with over 500 schools,
Wow.
including some big names like Eton College.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's when I was like, okay, there's got to be something to this. They're clearly doing something right.
Yeah, and the fact that they're in 20 countries says a lot. It's not just some small localized thing.
Yeah.
So when you were going through all the material, what really stood out to you?
Honestly, the first thing that jumped out was this whole real-time track. Imagine the students on a field trip, right?
Right.
And instead of relying on a paper list or a bunch of frantic phone calls, the school can actually see where they are live on a map. It's wild.
It's definitely a step up from those days of hoping for the best and crossing your fingers.
Yeah.
That the permission slip made it back.
So-
But it's important to get into how it actually works. So Orah integrates directly with the school's student information system, their SIS.
Okay, hold on. Time out for a sec. For those of us who don't speak fluent school, what exactly is an SIS?
Good point. It's basically the system schools use to keep track of all the student data grades, attendance, emergency contacts, all that jazz. And the really smart thing about Orah is that it plugs right into that existing system, usually through an API, which is kind of like a digital handshake between different software. So schools aren't stuck managing a whole other separate thing.
Gotcha. So it makes things easier behind the scenes, which is huge for those crazy busy administrators out there.
Oh, absolutely.
But let's get back to what it's like for the students. They're using this real-time tracking not just for field trips, but for everyday attendance, even for emergencies.
And that's where things get really interesting. Like, they gave this example from Millbrook School, where they used Orah during a fire drill. They could instantly see who they'd accounted for and who was missing. Imagine that in a real emergency could be life-saving.
No kidding. Talk about high stakes. But I can definitely see how that real-time info could make all the difference when it really matters.
Right.
Okay, but we got to address the elephant in the room here. This whole real-time tracking thing. Some people are going to hear that and be like, hold on, isn't that a bit much?
For sure. It's a valid concern, especially when you're talking tech and student privacy. But Orah seems to get that. They emphasize that this isn't about spying on students' every move. It's about having that extra layer of safety and support. Like, say a student has a medical condition and they're unaccounted for, knowing where they are could be crucial.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot between safety and, not being creepy big brother.
Exactly.
Okay, so speaking of student well-being, because that's another big piece of this Orah puzzle, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not just focused on where students are physically, but also on how they're doing emotionally.
Yeah, and that's where their mood check feature comes in.
Yeah.
I'll admit, when I first saw that, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, it sounds a little dystopian novel-ish. But the more I read about it, the more intrigued I got.
Oh, I had the same reaction, like, what is this, some kind of emotion tracker from the future?
Right.
So for those of us who haven't quite time traveled yet, what exactly is a mood check?
It's actually pretty simple. Basically, it's just a quick check-in for students to say how they're feeling. Orah gives them some prompts, like a mood scale, happy to sad, or a couple of words to describe their mood. It's meant to be really quick and easy, even for younger kids.
So instead of just assuming everyone's fine, it gives kids a way to actually say how they're doing, even if it's just a quick stressed or happy, right?
Exactly. And get this, Orah ties this whole thing into all that research that's coming out about how important social-emotional learning is. The thinking is, if kids regularly check in with their emotions, it's like they start to build up their self-awareness and get better at understanding their own feelings, like emotional intelligence training.
That's kind of cool, actually, like building a muscle, but for your feelings.
Right.
Okay, but let's be real. Teenagers aren't exactly known for spilling their guts to adults, So how does Orah deal with that?
Well, first off, it's not meant to be intrusive or anything. It's not like teachers are reading through their diaries or anything.
Yeah, right.
The mood checks are more about spotting trends and patterns over time.
So less about catching a kid having a bad day and more about noticing someone who might be struggling quietly for a while.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they had this example from Foxcroft Academy. They noticed this one student seemed totally fine outwardly, but they were always reporting low moods on their mood checks.
Oh, wow. What happened? Did they, bring in a whole team of therapists?
No, nothing like that.
Okay, good.
But because they had that data, they could reach out to the student and offer support. Turned out they were dealing with some family stuff, and they hadn't felt comfortable talking to anyone about it.
Wow, that's actually amazing. Sometimes just knowing someone's paying attention makes all the difference.
Totally.
But it also makes you think, that's a lot of responsibility, having access to that kind of info about a kid.
100%. And Orah seems to be very aware of that. They talk a lot about data privacy and security, and they're very clear about how they use the information, who has access to it. It's not just about having cool tech. It's about using it ethically.
Right. Got to be responsible with that stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked real-time tracking, we've talked mood checks, but there's that other piece to this whole Orah thing, right? Streamlined communication.
Yes. And if you've ever been bombarded with a million school emails, texts, and robocalls, this part's going to be a breath of fresh air.
Seriously.
Orah wants to be the one-stop shop for all communication between school and home.
No more digging through your inbox for that permission slip reminder or wondering if that snow day announcement went to spam.
Exactly. It's all their emails, texts, push notifications, all in the platform. They even have this thing where schools can see which messages have been read and by who, so they know important stuff isn't getting missed.
Now that's smart, especially these days when everyone's glued to their phones. Having a reliable way to reach parents and students quickly, that's key. But it can't just be about being fast, right? I mean, what about the actual message itself?
You're right. And to be fair to Orah, they do make it clear that this isn't about just sending even more messages. It's about making sure parents are in the loop and engaged with what's going on at school, clear, concise, and timed right. They even suggest using it for positive stuff, like celebrating students' achievements or giving updates about cool school events.
Okay, now that I can get behind. We've heard a lot about the good stuff. More safety, better student well-being, easier communication. But we got to be real. Anytime you bring technology into schools, especially if it involves collecting data about kids, there's going to be concerns.
Definitely.
And the big one, obviously, is privacy. Parents want to know their child's info is safe and being handled responsibly. And kids, especially as they get older, deserve their privacy too.
Absolutely.
So how does Orah address all that?
Well, they're really upfront about their security measures. They use the top-of-the-line encryption to protect student data, and they have strict rules about who can access what.
Okay, that's good to hear. But it's not just about the tech side of things, right? It's about building trust.
Exactly, and that's where the school comes in. You can't just throw new tech at a problem and hope for the best. Schools need to be open with parents, and students explain how the tech works, answer their questions, make sure everyone's on the same page and comfortable.
It's like anything else. Communication is key. You can have the best tech in the world, but if nobody understands it or trusts it, it's not going to work.
Right. And ultimately, tech should be a tool that helps make education better, not something that replaces those crucial relationships between teachers, students, and families.
Well said. So we've covered a lot, the nuts and bolts of Orah, real-time tracking, mood checks, streamlined communication. We've even talked about some of the big ethical questions about data privacy and the need for transparency and trust. But there's one more thing I wanted to hit before we wrap up. Student safety.
Yeah, it's a big one. And it's something that Orah really pushes in everything they put out. Their argument is if schools have a clearer picture of where students are and how they're doing, they're in a much better position to spot potential problems and step in early.
And they've got a point. Think about it. If a student's always late for school or skipping class or showing up to those mood checks feeling down, those could be signs that something's wrong.
Absolutely. And if you catch those warning signs early, you can prevent small issues from snowballing into bigger ones. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Makes sense. But also makes you wonder, how much responsibility should schools have for what happens outside of school hours? That's a tough one.
That is a tough one. There's no easy answer there. Schools definitely have a responsibility to keep their students safe, and that doesn't just disappear when the bell rings.
Yeah.
But there are limits to what they can realistically be expected to keep track of.
Right. It's about finding that balance, and it's a conversation that schools, parents, and communities need to have together.
100%. No single answer works for everyone. But if we keep talking openly and honestly about the role of technology in education, Hopefully we can find ways to use these tools in a way that benefits everyone and creates a safer, more supportive learning environment for students.
And that's something I think we can all get behind. It's kind of wild to think about how much technology is changing how we think about student safety and support.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's not just Orah. They're kind of at the forefront of this whole movement in schools, using technology to be more proactive and responsive to what students need.
And that makes me wonder if this becomes the new normal, like how does that actually change things long term? Imagine growing up with this tech always being there in school.
It's a big question, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're figuring it out as we go, which can be a little, I don't know, unnerving maybe.
Yeah.
But also really exciting because we have the chance to completely change how we support young people, build a system that actually sees their needs, their struggles, and responds to them.
Okay, now I really feel like we're in a sci-fi movie. But seriously, what would that even look like day to day?
Well, for one, I think it means moving away from this idea that everyone gets the same thing. One-size-fits-all education. With more data about what each kid needs, schools could actually tailor their support. Imagine personalized learning plans, help that's actually relevant, even counseling that starts before a kid's already in crisis, all based on real information.
So instead of waiting for kids to fall through the cracks, it's more like building a system that catches them before they even get close to the edge.
Exactly. And it's not even just about those who are struggling. It's about making things better for everyone. Like, say the mood check data shows a bunch of kids stressed during exams.
Yeah.
Schools could offer extra help, study groups, whatever, just because they're actually aware of what's going on.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But then there's that balance thing again, right? Like, as cool as all this sounds, there's always the possibility someone could misuse it or that it could backfire somehow.
You're not wrong to be cautious. And that's why having these conversations about ethics and privacy is so crucial. We can't just jump in head first without thinking of the potential downsides.
Totally. Like, Aura could be this amazing tool, but it all hinges on how it's actually used.
100%. And that responsibility, it all comes down to us, the adults, the teachers, the administrators, the parents. We're the ones who have to make sure this tech is used for good.
No pressure.
Right. But seriously, it's a big deal. And it takes being really aware, really open to adapting and changing things as we go.
Absolutely. It's not something anyone can do alone. It takes schools, parents, everyone working together and being honest about what's working and what's not.
And most importantly, putting the needs of the students first.
Always. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into Aura and the whole future of student safety and well-being, I think it's safe to say we've stumbled upon more questions than answers today.
That tends to happen when you're dealing with something new, something that could really shake things up.
That's true. But I think that's a good sign, actually. Because asking those questions, grappling with the what-ifs, that's how we figure out what we really want the future to look like.
Couldn't agree more. Sometimes asking the right questions is way more important than having all the answers.
So, to everyone listening, we'll leave you with this. As tech keeps changing the world, how do you think we should be taking care of students in the future? What role should technology have? And what are the big questions we need to be asking to make sure we're using these tools responsibly and ethically, not just blindly jumping on the bandwagon?
Those are the million-dollar questions right there.
They really are. Thanks for diving into this with us today, everyone.